He's an expert on the region and on the military political circumstances in which we now find ourselves. He's an exceedingly successful and popular analyst with his own platforms, but he's agreed to come on ours. He is Arnold August, journalist and author. Arnold, I'm much obliged to you. I'll cut to the chase. Is Blinken up to any good in Tel Aviv right now? And is he going to produce anything out of his hat?
I don't think that Blinken is up to anything good in Tel Aviv. I think that this desperate attempt by the United States to try to give the impression that the United States, that has been funding the Israeli Nazi regime all this time, is really interested in peace in the Middle East. I think, in my view, that what is happening now is very much connected to the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, which is going to start tomorrow, Monday, in Chicago, because even though the Biden administration or Kamala Harris would never admit it, but the position of their government is not popular at all amongst the broad population, and specifically within the realm of the Democratic Party base. And so before the elections take place, I believe that the United States is desperately trying to give the impression to the world and to the United States that it is interested in peace. They do not support Israel and all that. Now, I don't think, like, it was interesting that it's gone pretty far, George. I mean, I read in the Haaretz newspaper today that given this contradiction between, on the one hand, Blinken and Biden and Harris, on the one hand, trying to force a ceasefire onto Israel, there's actually talk now, believe it or not, that the Biden administration is thinking about carrying out sanctions against the most radical right-wing members of the Netanyahu government. So when is it going to be, if Netanyahu was so interested in peace, why did he have to say today that Hamas has backtracked, which is not the case? In fact, it is Hamas who is upholding the tentative agreements that were agreed to in the past, and Netanyahu has been, changing the goalposts every, along the way. I don't think that Netanyahu is interested at all in peace. I think everyone here, yourself, all our listeners, we want peace in Gaza. We want the killing to stop, the genocide to stop. But in a realistic manner, irrespective of what happens in the coming weeks and days regarding this latest so-called attempt at a ceasefire, in my view, the only solution is really a military solution. That is the defeat of the Israeli Zionist regime on the battleground. And I think it's not unrealistic, because who would have thought, on October 7th, all the way, back then, that Hamas not only has not been defeated, despite the billions of dollars that the United States has funneled into Israel, and despite all of the very nefarious propaganda that you are very aware of, George, that the anti-Israel movement, for example, in Canada, United States, and around the world, is anti-Semitic, a major important lie. However, despite all these lies, and despite the military hardware, the Israel and the United States have not been able to suppress the resistance of the Palestinian people. On the contrary, it has become stronger. And now, as we speak, because of these contradictions, I believe that a new important situation on the international scale is building up with regards to Israel. And that is, China, of course, was not happy at all, to say the least, when Israel assassinated the leader of Hamas in Lebanon, in Iran, because it was that very leader who just a short time before that assassination, he was in Beijing working out the Beijing agreement with all the other factions led by China. So this was what Israel did was in fact a slap in the face against China. And when you mess with China, you got a problem on your hands, right? Not only that, linked to what is happening with regards to China, there was a recent meeting in Tehran of an important security leader of Russia, as well as an important security leader of Iran in Tehran, to work out a common agreement on how to continue the resistance against Israel. So the basic conclusion, I hope that there's a peace agreement. Everyone wants it. You would have to be out of your mind not to want it. However, it is not realistic because whatever Netanyahu says, the entire Israeli society is based on the notion of eliminating the Palestinian people. Even those who are demonstrating regularly every weekend in Tel Aviv for the return of their relatives. I watched those demonstrations religiously. Sorry, no pun intended. Every week on TV. I've never seen any of the spokespersons of this movement in Tel Aviv, so-called pro-democracy movement in Tel Aviv against Netanyahu. I've never seen any of them express even 1 ounce of sympathy, empathy for what is happening against the Palestinian people under the leadership of their own regime. So the whole Israeli society is infected with this notion that it has to be, Israel has every right to establish itself and on the basis of eliminating the Palestinian people.
Well, of course, Netanyahu doesn't want peace. Right. The question is, are the American government ready for all-out war? Because that's what will happen, Arnold. It won't just be a retaliation of a new type from the resistance from Iran. It will presumably be of such quantity as well as difference in quality that Netanyahu will have his own interests in responding to the response. Iran and its allies then respond to the response to the response. And the balloon goes up. And the potential of all these global players being involved in a hot war against each other, are the American government really ready for that, do you think?
I don't think at this time, in the context of the DNC convention, which is taking place in a few days, I do not think that the American government wants a war in the Middle East. Not that it goes against any of their principles, on the contrary, but it does not serve their interests at this time for the United States to have a war in the Middle East. Now, this may change after the elections, I don't know. But in any case, I think that everything is very much linked to the DNC, even on the issue of Ukraine. It's a similar situation where, in my view, why did Zelensky launch that very adventurous action into Russia, which we now see today, after several days, they're actually losing it because he is fearful, I believe, that Trump may win the elections, and Trump's view is perhaps to reduce the amount of armaments that goes to Ukraine, not on the basis of any principle, as we know, but because of his own outlook in terms of having, spending money to make America great again. So I think that it's a moving target, with regards to Israel, with regards to Ukraine, but the United States does definitely not want a war at this time in the Middle East, and that's why we have such a sharp contradiction between, on the one hand, the American government and Israel, something that we would never have dreamed about way back in October, where to the extent that they're actually talking about imposing personal sanctions on some of the members of the Netanyahu government.
It has been 10 months that shook the world, no pun intended, now into the 11th month. But if the Democrats make that marginal tacking, to refusing visas to Ben Gvir, who doesn't want to go to the United States in any case. Trump will shift ground and attack the Democrats for not supporting Israel strongly enough, blindly enough, not arming them enough. Therefore, the fundamental problem, Arnold, is that the American people either don't care or are sympathetic enough to Israel that there's votes in being the most pro-Israel politician on the block. That's the problem, isn't it?
Yes, I think you're right with regards to your evaluation of Trump, but it's pretty contradictory. He said that, what you just quoted, but he also said that the killing has to stop, the war has to stop, there has to be peace. So it's pretty contradictory. We don't know exactly how we will go if he is elected. But with regards to the sentiment, I would say that, being very familiar with the situation in Canada and the United States, in my own town of Montreal, my alma mater, McGill, those movements that were carried out by the youth in the United States and Canada, as well as England, Scotland, and many places in Europe, these movements were and are still very important. And even though the status quo in the United States will never admit it, it shook the very foundations of the U.S. imperial project. Within their own country, people have said the unbelievable. We are against Israel. It's a genocidal state. It's a fascist state. It's a Nazi state. They did this with a lot of guts. And in addition to that, they're trying to keep that narrative alive that the people in the United States are pro-Israel. Okay, just a few days ago, the youth in New York City, I believe, in a very courageous manner, disrupted the meeting that was taking place between, on the one hand, Kamala Harris and her advisors in a New York City restaurant. They actually attacked the restaurant. They interrupted the restaurant and destroyed their whole meeting. But I noticed, perhaps it's different in England, I don't know, but in Canada and the United States, they never showed what happened. I just found out about it by the social media. But they kept that out of the news in order to maintain their narrative that everyone in the United States is pro-Israel. What a lie. It's the contrary. Even the polls show that the majority of people...
of course, the number of people who are opposed to Israel has never been higher. I'm in a position to say that authoritatively because I was involved in it when you could fit everybody in one hall that was openly supporting the PLO. So, of course, but we mustn't confuse the dozens with the hundreds with the thousands with the millions. And of course, I'm with the brave people who disrupted Harris's lunch. And of course, I'm with the hundreds of thousands sometimes that are on the demonstrations. But they are not millions. They are not tens of millions. They are not scores of millions. The only reason why there can be a Dutch auction in the US political system as to who is the greater supporter of Israel can only be because they think there's votes in it. It's not because they love Israelis or love Jews. You should go to their golf clubs. You won't find many. It's a Dutch auction because there's profit to be had, electoral profit, and even some financial profit. That's the truth of it, isn't it, Arnold?
Yes, I think you're right. One should not, while highlighting as we do and supporting the heroic actions over many months by the young people in the United States, Canada, and other capitalist countries, they are just quite small in number. I mean, even compared to, for example, in my time in 1968, when we opposed the war in Vietnam, that was massive. That was literally in the thousands, if not the millions. It was a massive movement, and it was beyond the youth as well. Now, the important thing as well, when we talk about resistance, of course, we like to highlight and applaud the youth. But in my view, the most important thing in this whole struggle is the resistance of the Palestinian people, the heroic Palestinian people. They are the ones who've kept the notion of Palestine and its rights alive all of this time. And we have to especially admire them, salute them. At the same time, it is within this context that you have movements in the capitalist countries to support Palestine. But, there are many ways, I mean, as a bit of a joke perhaps, to increase this, support for Palestine. It's sort of a joke. I've been watching these sparring going on between Pierce Morgan on the one hand saying you condemn Hamas, and others going on his show saying no, I do not condemn Hamas, and then saying look how great I am. I did not agree with Pierce Morgan not to condemn Hamas. I'm sorry. The issue is not to condemn or not Hamas. The issue is like if I was on his program, I would say not only do not condemn Hamas, Mr. Morgan, but I support Hamas as a legitimate liberation movement coming out of the Palestinian people and in their just struggle against Israel. I think that type of thing would help in the long run, even though it might, ruffle some feathers amongst people on the left. But I think that, it may have been in October, November, justifiable to say, oh, I do not condemn Hamas. Great. But the situation has changed so much, George, since that time. And now the issue is we have to go on the offensive and say we support Hamas. We support Hezbollah. We support the axis of resistance against Israel. So irrespective of what happens with regards to these negotiations in Qatar, irrespective, that we know in the long run the issue has to be settled on the battlefield.
Arnold August, journalist and author and broadcaster for that matter. Thanks for being with us on the mother of all talk shows.